I love the sports analogy, and you and I are big sports fans. But here's where I want to kind of break that apart and apply it in the business world, right? Because you would never see a wide receiver that a play was called and just decide, I'm going to run a different route. I don't want to do that, right? They wouldn't do that. But it's not like in the business world that we're intentionally running different routes, but we're all smart people. We all reach the levels of leadership that we're at, and we can make decisions and we think they're the right ones. But we got to remember we're all on the same team, on the same playing field. And when we decide to do something different, it impacts everybody else and their expectations, right? What keeps us from operating like a football team? What keeps us from operating like that inside of the business world?
Well, you said something that I think is key. You said a wide receiver would not decide that they are now some other offensive line person. They may have to block for someone else. They may have to do something a little bit different. They see the same goal, which is cross that, line to get a touchdown, crossing the plane, breaking the plane, and getting the score. They all see that and are very intentional about we're all here to do that. That's the only thing that matters. The only thing that matters is getting to the playoffs. The only thing that matters is making it through the playoffs. The only thing that matters is getting to the Super Bowl and having a shot to be a Super Bowl champion. And that every day as a player, I'm thinking about that. And I remember, when I think back, and maybe at the time it kind of, there's a difference between maybe your organization is smaller and maybe it's a little bit larger, than maybe you have a very large organization. When you have the parts that are kind of away from the center, from the brain, I do think there's an attenuation that happens where there's just a signal that's a lower signal. And sometimes it feels like people that are out, that are further out, they're actually not getting the signal. And so I do think that communication becomes probably the most important thing. But I would also say communication is difficult. People hear things differently, they learn things differently. Some people are visual, some people they have to hear it, some people are I've got to do it in order for me to be able to execute. And what I think is most important is really understanding each of the types of persons that are on the teams, that you have to try to figure out, how do I get the best out of this person? And how do I make sure that I'm communicating clearly? I think it's always easier when you're winning, right? When you're winning, the person who's calling you the plays is a genius. When you're not winning, it's like, what are they doing? And then you do see people trying to take it into their own hands. And I think it's a very good example that you use. You said you don't see a wide receiver kind of running a different route. Not exactly true. What you do see is a wide receiver tweeting or somehow going on social media talking about that they didn't get the ball or something else is not going well. But what you do know when you see that and you have that observation is you see that kind of friction, and that friction 100% slows down that friction makes it difficult for everyone on the team to try to figure out, like, how do we smooth this out and kind of get back on track and make sure that we're all, for lack of a better term, rowing in the same direction or running, calling the same play and trying to execute on that play. What I would say is that leadership has a lot to do with it as well. Has the leader been clear about what the strategy is? Is the leader clear on what we're supposed to do? Does everyone respect the leader? The one thing that I would say, where I would use Larry as an example, is Larry was very clear. He was extraordinarily clear. And he was also extraordinarily forgiving. And those are things that you may not see in cultures today. And what I mean about extraordinarily forgiving, he had a habit of really letting us make mistakes so we could course correct. So if we tried something And at the time I ran all pricing and licensing. And if we priced something and it like just was like a turd, we just fixed it. It's like that didn't work. No one's buying it at that price. No one's using that metric. That what we thought we could do, we can't do. Just because we spent a fortune building it doesn't mean we could spend a fortune charging for it. And sometimes those things didn't work. And sometimes, again, this goes into, what is your job? What role do you play? And there were oftentimes I had guys in development, they would be like, Jacqueline, I think we could charge this. I'm like, we can't charge that. It's not going to work. And sometimes we would just say, okay, fine. We'll like let this one go and see how it works. Even though with whatever research that myself and my team had done, whatever conversations Safra and I would have had, we would just say, well, we'll see. They feel very insistent. We'll see. Let's try it. And oftentimes, and this is what I mean when you have to let someone who has the expertise do the job, it didn't work. And so that only has to happen once or twice. And then people are like, okay, well, Jacqueline knows what she's doing. And I think that's important. When people have certain experiences where they buy toothpaste or something, they have a perception of how to do a thing, and that thing may be pricing, right? If people have they've done a little bit of coding, right? They have a perception now that they're somehow the master developer. And it's like, no, we were just practicing in your garage. I feel like I coded a few things. There's no way I'm going to call myself that person. And even having, when I was at IBM, I think I had mentioned to you, I had distinguished engineers and senior technical managers that reported to me. I would never call myself a developer. Like I had enough acumen that I could lead someone who was doing these things, but doing them was a different thing. And so it's important to understand what is your role. They trusted me that I knew enough to figure out like what were the solutions that we were going to be building, that we're going to be complementing some other offers that we had, that I knew enough to go figure out how to get the right answer. But it doesn't mean that I was sitting there trying to be leading development. And I think those are opportunities to build trust and expertise, but really understanding what you know and what you don't know and what your limitations are, I think is really important.